Niagara Falls, on the border between the United States and Canada. This is just one source of our fresh water, the water we use every day in our homes and schools, our fields and factories. Looking at the falls, it's easy to think we have a limitless supply of clean, fresh water. But all around North America, there are signs that the quantity and quality of our freshwater resources are in danger. These students from Southfield, Michigan, know their fresh water is in danger, and they're on the way to do something about it. Since 1970, students from Southfield have monitored the health of the Rouge River, which runs through their community. The Rouge River has been identified as a major source of pollution in Lake Erie, one of the 5 Great Lakes. The 4 branches of the Rouge run through southeastern Michigan, then join and empty into the Detroit River. The Detroit, in turn, flows into Lake Erie, supplying it with about 90% of its water. Lake Erie, along with Superior, Michigan, Huron, and Ontario, forms part of the boundary between the United States and Canada. Together, the 5 Great Lakes hold nearly 20% of the surface fresh water on Earth. The lakes get much of their fresh water supply from rivers and streams that empty into them. The area of land drained by these rivers is the Great Lakes watershed. The same rivers are also an avenue for pollution. Rainwater washes pollutants from roads and other paved surfaces into sewers that empty into the rivers. The rivers carry the pollutants into the lakes. Many of these pollutants are invisible, making them hard to detect. Today, during the Rouge's yearly checkup, students from Southfield will test for many of these hard-to-see pollutants and try to determine where they come from. They'll work with students from 40 other schools to test water quality throughout the Rouge River system. One of their tests measures the percentage of oxygen in the water, an indication of how much life the river can support.
Yeah, there is oxygen in there because that's why the flacking's there. That's how you can tell.
This test shows there is some oxygen in this part of the river. About 50 kilometers downstream from Southfield, another team of students samples the Rouge River where it flows into the Detroit River.
That's good.
Well, this river is actually where the Rouge River has emptied into. And so we're trying to figure out what upriver from the Rouge, what people have done upriver to see how it's actually going to affect it down here. You know, you can't notice by looking in this river whether or not it's polluted. And so doing the chemical test, it tells us how polluted it is. And we may be able to find like a combined sewer system that's emptying into the river right there, and that may be able to be fixed.
Okay. Right here, it shows.
Using a computer network, the students share their findings with the other groups that participated in the Rouge River study.
Martin Luther King going up downstream to Kettering.
In one area, they discover that sewage is mistakenly flowing from a pipe right into the river. Another stretch of the river shows high levels of nitrates, possibly caused by fertilizer runoff from a nearby neighborhood.
As you're coming down, about midway up in the Farmington area.
After their field tests, students experiment with a model of the Rouge.
the substrates.
They learn how natural processes help filter pollution in the river.
And then you hit the swampy areas, the flats. This is the area that's really important that people want to get rid of because they say it's ugly, but this is the filtering system for the river. This takes all of that pollution, a lot of the nutrients out of the water, puts it in plant form. And so the swamps, even though people don't like them, are a very, very important aspect of the river.
While wetlands filter some pollutants from the water, another process recycles it. All fresh water on Earth moves through a process called the hydrologic cycle. The sun provides the heat to evaporate water from oceans, lakes, and rivers. Some water also evaporates from the soil, and some is released by plants. Water vapor rises in the atmosphere, then cools and condenses to form clouds. The water returns to Earth as rain, snow, sleet, or hail. Some water evaporates before it hits the ground. Much of the water runs off into rivers, lakes, and oceans. Some water soaks into the ground. Slowly moving through the Earth, the groundwater will eventually flow into rivers and oceans. Then the cycle continues. Through the hydrologic cycle, Earth's fresh water has been recycled for millions of years. But this cycle can't clean up the pollution produced by an ever-growing human population. More than 35 million people live in the Great Lakes watershed, and in many areas, their activities have overwhelmed the lake's natural abilities to renew themselves. By the 1960s, Lake Erie showed dramatic effects of too much pollution. Dead fish littered the lake. And one of the rivers leading into Lake Erie, the Cuyahoga, actually burst into flames when oil and other pollutants ignited. The U.S. and Canadian governments agreed to work together to clean up and protect the Great Lakes. They passed laws requiring industry to clean up its discharges and put controls on certain pollutants. Today, Lake Erie looks much better, but the job isn't done. In Windsor, Ontario, Canadian students are joining their U.S. counterparts in monitoring the rivers in the Great Lakes watershed. They're getting ready to test water quality in the Little River.
There's a plant there. But that's the tracks. You actually...
Like the Rouge River in Michigan, the Little River empties into the Detroit River, ultimately affecting water quality in Lake Erie.
Yeah, it's deep. I want you to test it with the sticks before you go in. All right? Yes. All right. Would you please take a meter stick and make sure that you check the water depth before you go in so you don't disappear? Wonderful. And you can swim?
Practice your back.
Good. You guys...
As one way to determine water quality, students identify the types and numbers of insects in the river. They find only a few insect species, an indication that pollution has taken its toll on aquatic life in the river. On both sides of the border, students have made their communities more aware of the problems facing their local rivers. And the communities have responded, putting more money into setting aside habitats and improving sewage systems. Moving west, the Great Lakes give way to the Great Plains. Here, surface water is scarce. But underneath the plains, there's enough water to fill Lake Huron, one of the Great Lakes. This underground water supply is the Ogallala Aquifer, also called the High Plains Aquifer. Stretching from South Dakota to Texas, it's one of the largest supplies of groundwater in the world. People once imagined the Ogallala as an underground lake or river, but it's actually made up of sand and other gravelly sediments that hold water much like a stony sponge. When it rains, water slowly soaks through the ground and into the aquifer. It's taken millions of years to build up the aquifer's huge reserves. In some areas, natural springs form where water from the Ogallala wells up to the surface. The springs feed marshes, streams, and rivers. Because these surface supplies are limited, early farmers built windmills to draw more water from underneath the ground. But wind power could bring only a fraction of the aquifer's wealth to the surface. Today, with modern machinery, we can reach deep into the heart of the aquifer and tap waters that have taken millions of years to accumulate. Across the region, gasoline engines pump water from wells into pipes, leading to extensive irrigation systems. Slowly moving like a hand on a clock, center pivot irrigation systems create giant circles of crops across the landscape. A single system can water an area about the size of 100 football fields in a day. Water from the Ogallala has transformed the dry plains into rich farmland. With irrigation, farmers can grow corn and other crops that need large amounts of water. And with a steady supply of corn and water, the beef business boomed. But feeding and watering cattle has taken its toll on the Ogallala, requiring an estimated 3,700 liters of water for every kilogram of beef produced. As early as the 1950s, the enormous demand for water began to drain the aquifer's bounty. In some areas, people pumped water from the aquifer faster than rainwater could naturally refill it. Falling water levels forced many irrigation wells to be abandoned. Water from the Ogallala aquifer is the lifeblood of Imperial, a small farming community in western Nebraska. Young farmers like Britt and C.J. Kenning know the importance of water to their way of life. Without water for crops and livestock, the local economy would dry up. Britt and C.J. are concerned that water levels in the aquifer have already dropped by more than 13 meters since 1964. At this rate, within 50 years, the remaining water will lie so deep that it will become too expensive to pump it to the surface. As part of their activities with the Future Farmers of America, C.J. and Britt are taking action to help conserve the aquifer's water.
In Chase County, there's a lot of people using water, and that depletes our aquifer. Well, if we reuse water, well, that's that much water that we've saved. Flood irrigation is our old system, but we've kind of introduced a new way to reuse water. We take the water from the well that we've pumped out of the aquifer, up into the pipe, and we open up the gates and let the water out and let it flow down from the top of our flood ground into the ditch we've made.
The water that doesn't soak into the ground runs into the ditches at the bottom of the field, then into a collection pond. On the pond, a floating pump sends the water back to the top of the field. Another way to save water is to reduce evaporation. In the past, all center pivot irrigation systems sprayed water into the air. On the Johnson's farm, they've added new drop sprinklers to their irrigation system.
Well, we used to have this old system that sprayed water all over the place, and we lost a lot to evaporation. We were lucky if it hit the plants, but now we have this new system that has drops, and it gets water closer to the ground, and so it saves water, and it gets to the roots.
And then later in the year, we switch the nozzles around, and the water sprays up under the leaves and knocks the bugs out.
By adopting such irrigation methods, farmers are finding that they're drawing less water from their wells. And that means they're conserving the aquifer's water supply for future generations. Young future farmers of America are also experimenting with ways to raise crops without any irrigation. Here, they planted corn in the stubble left behind after a wheat crop was harvested. The ground isn't plowed or tilled. Left undisturbed, the soil holds more moisture. Farmers may be concerned about running out of water, but some of their practices threaten the quality of the water they do have. Pesticides and other pollutants can contaminate groundwater supplies. The pollutants are carried into the aquifer as rain and irrigation water slowly seep into the earth. In Schuyler, Nebraska, volunteers are plugging an abandoned well to help prevent groundwater pollution. Polluted water can run directly into the well shaft, carrying contaminants deep into the aquifer.
Well, it's good that we're plugging this, because if somebody would dump paint or motor oil around this area, it would go into the well and seep through the top of the casing if the well wasn't plugged and go into the underground aquifer, which would contaminate your groundwater. And it's pretty scary to think that when you take a glass of water out of your kitchen, that's what you'd be drinking.
Any pollutant dumped on the ground can eventually end up in groundwater supplies. And once groundwater is contaminated, it's difficult and expensive to clean up.
Okay, that's it, guys. Good job.
Beyond the plains, high in the Rocky Mountains, melting snows form trickling streams. Rushing downhill, the streams run together to form rivers. Where the rivers unite, they give birth to the mighty Colorado. Over millions of years, the waters of the Colorado carved the Grand Canyon. Today, people have harnessed the river's power for their own uses, and these demands have nearly drained the river dry. After flowing through scores of dams and canals, the Colorado now trickles away in the Mexican desert before reaching its age-old terminus in the sea. As the major source of surface water in the arid Southwest, the Colorado River brings life to more than 21 million people in the United States and Mexico. From the Colorado's start in the Rockies to its natural end in the Gulf of California, aqueducts were built to tap the river's flow. Reaching across desert and scrubland, the aqueducts carry water to farms hundreds of kilometers away. Water from the Colorado also shoots through fountains in Las Vegas, Nevada, fills swimming pools in Southern California, keeps golf courses green in Arizona, and irrigates cotton in Mexico. To control floods and create a steady supply of water, the U.S. government built more than a dozen major dams on the Colorado. Towering more than 50 stories high, the Glen Canyon Dam in northern Arizona was completed in 1963. The dam created Lake Powell, a huge reservoir able to hold a 2-year supply of the river's flow. Water released through the dam turns huge turbines that generate electricity used throughout the West.
Do some of that on the river too.
At Lee's Ferry, just below the dam, students from the nearby city of Page join scientists to investigate how the Glen Canyon Dam has altered the balance of life in the river. Biologist Dave Wegner leads the Glen Canyon environmental studies.
What we're studying here is the impact of Glen Canyon Dam on the beaches, the sediment resources that still exist within the Grand Canyon. Glen Canyon Dam was closed in 1963, and it effectively cut off the sediment supply to the Grand Canyon. Now, approximately 90% of the sediment that used to come down to rebuild the beaches every year is now trapped in Lake Powell. The sediment is really the key element within the Grand Canyon ecosystem, because not only does it provide the nice beaches for the recreationists to camp on and sleep on and have fun on, the sediment also provides a substrate for all the plants to grow on.
The dam has also changed the way the river flows.
In any given day, the water may vary from 2 feet to perhaps 10 feet in elevation as the water goes up and down. The reason for that is that Glen Canyon Dam and the generators are like a spigot. You can turn the water on very quickly and the water comes up. As you put more water through the dam, it generates electricity.
Scientific studies have proven that the changing flows wear away the beaches, decreasing the amount of sand or sediment on them.
Right up in here, you can see where the sand has been washed away right up to there. That's really interesting. When I was here
By regularly measuring the amount of sand on selected beaches throughout the Grand Canyon, scientists can determine how they change over time.
Shooting back towards the instrument itself, and what it does, it sends out a beam of light.
Before the dam was built, the sun warmed the Colorado's shallow waters. Now, ice-cold water is released from the depths of Lake Powell. Introduced species like these trout thrive in the cold, clear water. But natives like the humpback chub and the Colorado squawfish are now endangered. In fact, the squawfish has already disappeared from the Grand Canyon.
What we're doing here is very, very important, because it's going to help us in the future identify how do we manage the resources, how do we take into consideration the needs for electricity, water, endangered species, environmental resources, cultural resources. This is not an easy game. This is a huge puzzle that we're all trying to figure out how to put the pieces together.
Tough choices about managing water are also being made on the East Coast. And nowhere is the water puzzle more complex than in southern Florida. The demand for water from growing cities like Miami and West Palm Beach threatens life in the Everglades, one of North America's most precious wetlands. Life in the Everglades depends on water that flows across the land from the north. Now, with much of that water diverted for human use, wildlife is in danger. More than 90% of the wading birds that once lived in the Everglades have disappeared. As wildlife struggles to survive, the demand for water still grows. Every day, nearly 900 people move to South Florida. Each resident uses about 400 liters of water a day. And in the winter, 12 million tourists come to visit and soak up some sun. The Florida sunshine also nourishes a multi-billion-dollar agricultural industry. But irrigation water carries fertilizers and other pollutants into the Everglades, creating even more problems for wetland wildlife. What's the answer to balancing South Florida's needs for fresh water? For a start,
turn it off! Turn it off! Fill it up! Make it quick! Plan it smart!
public service announcements like this, produced by the South Florida Water Management District, show people how they can help conserve water.
Lifeblood of South Florida. Don't bleed us dry. Turn it off!
The announcements have encouraged more people to xeriscape, to landscape with native plants that can survive droughts. And some communities are recycling wastewater for certain uses. All across the continent, people are taking action to protect the lakes, rivers, and aquifers that supply them with fresh water. Our freshwater resources once seemed inexhaustible. Today, it's up to each one of us to protect them for the future.